Hello there reason people, Pooh Bear here and welcome to my channel. And today we are going to be building ourselves a mini modular monophonic synthesizer. Today's discussion really is about synthesizers in general and really about the separate little components which make up a synthesizer. It's going to be very high level and I am going to be using modules, but you can transfer your knowledge, what you learned today, across to your Thors and subtractors and any other kind of synthesizer out there. One of the main reasons I'm actually picking on doing it modular is because obviously we're going to be also learning about wiring and CV. Today we're not going to be going into too much detail about CV, but in the next part I'm going to be going into a lot more discussion about the different types of CV, gate, note CV, normal CV, where it's actually all the same thing, and even poly CV. As you can see, I've actually just built this monophonic synthesizer, and really we're coming up to about a minute's time. So it's very, very quick that you can actually produce these things once you get pretty efficient at wiring. So anyway, without further ado, let's have a quick listen to it. First device that we're actually going to need will be our tone generator. Tone generators can come in many different formats, and the one we're going to be using today is called a W.A.O, and it's by Murf. It's a good old traditional tone generator. It's able to produce a couple of different waveforms, which we'll have a look at closely in a minute. It's slightly different because it has like this follow MIDI option. You'd find most oscillators, and by the way, VC just literally stands for voltage control. So you're going to see a VCO, a VCA and a VCF. So when you see them, you can just drop off the first bit, voltage control, and just think of it as an oscillator, an amp and a filter. We refer to it as voltage control oscillator because obviously we will use CV, which is control voltage, to control these devices with. So as I said, this actual device comes with a number of different waveforms, but it's slightly different because you don't have a selector on the front, what you might be used to on a normal synth. So on the back, you actually have to change the audio. So at the moment, if I play, we've got ourselves a sine wave, and let me just turn this right down. We've also got ourselves a triangle. Sawtooth, or ramp up because it's going from a 0 upwards, and the ramp down will obviously come from the 100 coming down. And we've also got ourselves a square, and with the square there is a pulse with modulation, and that's just basically changing where the crossover point's going to be on that square. There's a few other options on this particular device, like there's you've got oversampling, you can turn oversampling on off. There's an analog digital mode. The main thing I've noticed, obviously between different devices you may see other knobs saying analog or whatever on them, and they do different things. A lot of them will mess around with the fine tune. They just slightly drift that, so it's slowly going out of tune, ever so slowly, because that's what old analog synths used to do. They used to go out of tune as you was playing them. On this one, what I've noticed is when you go into analog mode, without a doubt, it seems to be on a lot of the number of the waveforms, it's actually adding some harmonics to it, and on one or two, I think it's actually taken a couple of harmonics away. But apart from that, basic octave, semi, fine, which is also known as cent on some systems. We've got our pulse width, which is quite a handy one, and by the way, the pulse width only ever affects the square. It doesn't affect any of the other waveforms, so that's purely for square, and that is a good one to put an LFO on, which we'll have a look at very closely. We've got a volume level, so we can actually change the level. Most of the time, if you're running this as what I refer to as a straight oscillator, you'll have that 100%. When you start to dial this down really is when you start getting into the FM side. So on the back again of this particular device, we've got a couple of audios in, one called a sync and one called FM. These are a little bit out of scope for this beginner's tutorial, but this is really starting to get into FM synthesis where we can use one of these oscillators to modulate another one. And I'll probably do an episode on that as well. The other CV inputs on the back is we can put, say, something like an LFO. It's quite a good option to go onto the pulse width modulation. We've got the pitch. Most of the time you don't really plug straight into the pitch. You will take your MIDI data really from your keyboards and go straight into the note. But we do have this pitch option, which really does can get you some really nice, weird, wacky sounds when you start messing around with that one. But for your basic sounds, you tend to use the note. So as we're actually talking about the pulse width, and we just sort of mentioned really that's quite good for an LFO, let's have a quick talk about LFOs. Once again, Murf offer this, and by the way, these are all free, these rack extensions, and everything I'm going to be demonstrating today is going to be free. Okay, I've got a scope down here. These items down here are not free, but this oscilloscope, this is Melda Productions. That's a free one as well. It comes down in their free bundle. It's quite a nice little oscilloscope that to see what we're looking at. Again, when you look at this, you can see here, obviously we've got our certain waveforms, and they're exactly the same. So between a VCO and an LFO, really, there isn't too much difference between what they are. They're essentially the internals of actually generating the waveforms are going to be the same. The big difference between a VCO and an LFO really is the actual range. So low frequency means it's going to go really slow, and as it's going really slow, it's going to, you can't hear it on your audio hardware. It's going that slow. You can get some LFOs like little LFO, which do go from an incredibly slow rate right up into the audio frequency, and you can actually use that LFO as a sound source as well. So you can actually produce sound out of it. Again, it has a digital and an analog switch, exactly the same as above. Okay, the other difference is obviously we can actually change the rate, so that's changing the speed of it, and you can fine tune that. The pulse width, again, is really to do with the square waveform, so you can actually then adjust that on the LFO itself. And again, the level. So the level really is how much of that LFO will really affect whatever device you happen to have plugged into it. So we can actually demonstrate that quite nicely straight away by let's actually just start off with a sine wave going into somewhere like the pulse width. And what I'm going to do now is just hold down the key on my keyboard, and you can start seeing we've got some movement. Let me put that onto digital so that makes it a bit more square, and I'm just going to take the rate down. So you can now see this having an effect, obviously, on this particular square up here. As I say, so the rate slows it down. If I take the level down, you notice it doesn't swing as far, so we can actually take this level right down, and then we just call it swinging in that sort of midpoint. And this level will be very, very similar to this pot here, and this is like what we refer to as a trim knob. Again, what makes these trim buttons quite unique, and you can see the developer deliberately made them small, is because they actually do tie up with the trim knobs on the back. Very rarely do your trim knobs on the back, you'd have control of them on the front, but he's actually done it in such a way so you can see that trim knob. It's very tiny to see. It's actually right down, so it's actually pointing over there. If we actually come here, and which one was it? Sorry, it's the pulse width, wasn't it? So I'm going to turn it right up here. So I've turned it up. Now if we go to the back, it's actually gone up. A bit hard to see that, but basically they are tied in together, which is quite unusual. So we can either use the trim, if I hold the key down again, or we can use the level. I just wanted to talk about the LFO at this stage, as I say, because it is so closely linked in with the VCO. So the LFO and VCOs, you can think of them the same thing. Obviously, the other big difference, again, within Reason itself, more than outside, is this is actually running obviously at CV rate, where this is running at audio rate. So these are audio rate, these are CV rates. So they'll be running at a minimum 1/64th of the resolution that these are running at. Say minimum because also it comes down to what buffer size you actually have set on your audio to what these rates will be. if you've got loopbacks going. But straightforward out into a device, they're 1/64th resolution of what the audio rate is. And I will go into a lot more detail about this resolution in my CV video. So I'm going to do one specifically about CV, and I will go into much more detail about that, just in case I'm not making sense at this stage. So really, I'm just going to get rid of that LFO. The next thing, really, what you usually do when you have a VCO is we need to control it. We like to have some kind of amplifier. So we're going to put it through a VCA, which is obviously an amplifier. And the way we're going to do that is I'm just going to disconnect that wire to start with. So we're going to take ourselves any one of these waveforms. We're going to put it into the audio in, and then we're going to take the audio out, and obviously we're going to go up to our mixer. So at the moment it should sound what it was sounding like before, no different. So what we want to do though is we want to take control of this level here. So this is what we want to actually take control of. I'm just going to put this on self-oscillation mode just a second. And self-oscillation mode means this oscillator will be running constantly all the time in the background. And now we're going to control the actual level of it using this VCA here. So by turning this up, we can hear ourselves a tone. I can come down slowly, I can sustain it, so I'm going to hold that level, and now I'm going to release it. And basically what I've just done then, I've just been an envelope. So I've just given it some attack time, I brought it down, kept it at sustain time, and then I actually done a release. And so that's what we're going to use an ADSR for. Now we call it an ADSR because it stands for attack, decay, sustain, and release. On some older devices, you may see it down as attack, decay, release, and then sustain. And the reason they do it that is because they've actually grouped it logically, because attack, decay, and release are all based on time, whereas sustain is the only one which is based on a level. Now, obviously, with newer or more to the point, you can get multi-stage envelopes. They act a little bit differently. Most of the time they do still have an attack and a decay, and they will have a release, but the middle section is they might have multiple stages, and they usually let you loop back on them, so actually the signal's going all over the place. And when you usually have multi-stage, it's a simple case of you are now affecting the level as well as the time to the next stage. So that's what makes them a bit different. But your box standard ADSR, this is what we're using here, and this is what we need to use to control this level. Now, ADSRs need a trigger, so they need a signal to come into them to say, hey, start. And then obviously, if we've got a sustain point like this, when we release, i.e. our note on our keyboard, it's going to then go into the release stage. So what we need to do now is convert our MIDI into CV to start controlling these devices. And for that, there's a number of devices out there which we can do that with. But the one I'm actually going to use, and the one I like a lot, is the Hamu. The reason I like using this quite a bit is A, we've got all these knobs, so when we start building up a number of systems, we can actually start wiring them up, and we can start doing a lot more controlling just from this one panel without having to scroll up and down all the time. And two, it's got two ways of controlling our MIDI data in and converting it to CV for us. We have the poly CV it supports, and again in my CV video I will go into great detail the difference between really about the poly and the normal, what we refer to as the normal note date gator. For this particular device, as we're building ourselves just a simple monophonic mono synthesizer, using these gates and notes are absolutely going to be perfect for us for what we need to do. So on the back, I'm actually going to take the note and I'm going to put it into the note of the VCO. I'm then going to take the gate data, and that's where I need to trigger my ADSR. So when my ADSR is triggered, I'm going to use that to control the VCA. So it's now going to control the volume level on there. It's got to turn this up, and as you can hear, you cannot hear anything. Now, oh, will that fit on the screen? Yep, there we go. So when I hold a key down now, we can hear it come in and we can hear it release. So if I actually put a longer release time on it, let's have a slightly higher sustain and a slower attack so you can hear it come in. And it's got quite a long release, as you can see. It's still actually going at the top. Sorry, I have turned this right down because these sort of tones do sort of blow my ears a little bit. So this now really is quite a usable device already. It's a little bit boring, but one of the things I think what we need to do is give it a filter. As soon as you start giving a filter, we can start really shaping what we're getting out of our VCO. And for us, the filter I'm actually going to use actually comes with Reason itself. And I'm just going to put the filter up here. Don't you just hate it when that happens? I should have held my shift key down when I actually created that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our VCO, out and we're going to put it into our filter, which it's done. We're going to come from our filter and this time we're going to go into our audio in. Our audio then is going to come, obviously, our audio out to our mix channel at the top there. And it's like I've got myself an extra mix channel created there when I drop that filter in. And in fact, let's just go back over to this triangle as well because it's just slightly softer on the ears. Now, the reason I'm putting this filter straight after the VCO, because you could get away with this particular filter, you can get away with it having it the other side of the VCA. So the VCA will come out and go into the filter. But there's certain filters, and I could probably demonstrate that, which will self-resonate. And if you've got yourself a self-resonating filter up, well, if it's the other side of the VCA, it's never going to shut up, even when you take your hands off the keys. So by having it this side, if it's self-resonating, it doesn't matter if it's chattering away, because we're going to close the gate off here, so we can't hear it. The other thing what we need to do with this is we need to give it some gate data, but we've already used the gate data up. So what we need to do there is grab ourselves a splitter or a splitter merger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gate and put it into the splitter, and I'm going to split it to take one back to the ADSR, and I'm going to take one and put it into the envelope gate here. Now this envelope gate is an ADSR. So what we're talking about here on the front is, here is our ADSR. ADSR is exactly the same as this ADSR. It just happens to be built into one module. The other nice thing about this is we've got this envelope amount, so we can say how much of this envelope is going to be applied to this frequency and resonance, and how much we're going to open it up and apply it. So it's going to give myself something a little bit quicker, and obviously you just need to sort of start tuning it into your taste, what you really want to hear. You might take that attack down so it's just slightly faster. And we've got ourselves a little pop going on. Usually with a pop, you just need to take the attack up slightly, because what's actually happening, because this oscillator here, it's going all the time, and I happen to have it on a triangle, it could be that I'm hitting my key when the triangle or the phase of it is actually at the top. And that's why you sort of get the popping sound. So usually by giving it even a softer, just a slight attack, you take them sort of pop sounds away. And really, this is it in a nutshell. We've now built ourselves a monopolyphonic synthesizer. all I'm going to do to finish this off is I'm actually just going to throw a couple of effects on it. Doesn't really matter what effects you throw in here. Let's just throw a couple of effects in. I'm just going to take that right down. So only once that's subtly going, let's have that down. Let's have that down there. Let's see what that sounds like. Not too bad, not too good. So you just have to play around with it until you think, actually, that's really what I'm after. I think actually it needs to be a bit brighter. This is where I might even go and change the waveform. Hey, that's not going too bad at all. So I think what we need to do is just recap exactly what we've gone over, and yeah. So when I create these devices, I'm actually going to hold my shift key down so nothing's actually auto-rooted. So the first thing that we're actually going to need is a VCO. From the VCO, we are then going to go through a filter. I might as well add a spider at this particular point, so we're going to split the gate data. From the filter, we're going to go into a VCA, and we're going to control that using a ADSR. And obviously we need to convert our MIDI data into CV, and we're using the Hamu for that. So let's just very, very quickly flip round to the back and start to get things wired up. So I'm going to take obviously any waveform that we want. I'm going to put that into the filter. From the filter out, we're going to go into the VCA in. From the VCA or the audio out on the VCA, and that really needs to go up to our mixer. So we've got a mixer up here, and then we're going to wire up the CV stuff. So we've got note data coming out of the Hamu, which goes into the note on the VCO. We're going to take our gate data and we're going to put that into a splitters, because we're going to split part of the gate data out is actually going to go into the ADSR itself. And then obviously we need that CV out of the ADSR to go into the CVA to control that. And the other part of that would then actually go into the filter itself. Then we need to configure a few things on the front. Like in this particular case, we're going to want self-oscillation. So we're going to turn self-oscillation on. You know it's working straight away because you can actually see a signal going into the filter. I'm going to have a bit of oversampling on. I'm going to have it on the analog. I'm going to drag it down an octave, and because we're using a square, we can have a bit of pulse width there. And then we just need to obviously configure some of the filters how we see fit. I'm actually going to go through an LP24 as well. Now this now should be working. And because we're finishing off, I always have to be awkward, don't I, and add a little bit extra. And that's actually what I'm going to do now. What I'm going to do is, this is still going to be a monophonic synthesizer, but I'm actually going to make it turn into two voices. So I'm going to actually add another oscillator in here. Let's put it there if I can. Excellent. I'm going to need to merge the audio signals, and I'm just going to use a spider for that. Don't have to use anything fancy, so I'm just going to put a spider in there. So what we're going to do now is, rather than going straight into the filter, I'm just going to merge that input, and I'm going to take another square out of the other VCO. We're going to merge that in. We're going to take that out and put that into the filter. So we now got them two, but obviously this is missing a bit of note data. So I'm going to take this note out of that one and put it into the splitter. So I'm now going to split the note. So it's going to go to each of these VCOs. And I'm going to bring this down another octave, a little bit further down. And again, we can play with the pulse width modulation. And I expect I'm going to have to just touch around with the volumes, which I'll do in a second. We're going to want that onto self-oscillate as well. And finally, what I'm going to add into here is, just as a little bit of fun, I'm just going to put this player device in here. I'm going to reset this patch, and we're going to put our own in. Let's put it into a major scale. Here we go. Got a few little things in here. And what I've also got set up over here is I've created myself very simple little drum pattern there, and I've actually got myself a few VCOs which are going to be making up a little bit of a kick drum. I'm using an LFO and I'm using some white noise coming out of that, and I've shaped it in a way so it's going to be a little bit like a hi-hat. And really this is just for a pure bit of fun, so in a way I'm going to say thank you for watching as I play this out, and bye for now.